Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the askST at NLB video series, brought to you by the Straits Times and the National Library Board. These monthly sessions aim to answer the burning questions that you have for the topic of the day. To those who have submitted your questions, thank you for sending them across to us. I'm Liang, Assistant Political Editor at the Straits Times, and with me today is Terence Ho, Associate Professor in Practice at the Kuan School of Public Policy at NUS. Today we will discuss the recently concluded Budget 2022 and what it means for businesses, workers, and the next generation of Singaporeans. Welcome, Prof. Ho.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Terence, if I can call you that.
Sure.
I think you are uniquely placed to discuss with us the budget and the specific policies in the budget given your storied career. If I can just briefly run through. I think before you became Associate Professor at the Kuan School, you started your career as an economist at MTI, looking at macroeconomic trends. Then you spent a couple of years at MOE in policy work on university and technical education. And you also spent 6 years at the Ministry of Finance, where you had a ringside seat to the annual budget formulation. And then you spent 4 years at MOM, where you were involved in areas such as foreign workforce policy and manpower planning. And last year you wrote a book about the Singapore's socio-economic system, the contours of policy shifts since the new millennium, and also the challenges and choices facing the Singapore system going forward.
Right.
Yeah. So my first question to you is about the elephant in the room, this budget, which is the GST increase from 7% to 9%. So unless you've been in a cave all this time, I think we all are aware that the GST increase is going to happen next January, 1% up to 8%, and then the year after that to 9 percentage points. So we know that Singaporeans have been bracing for the increase for a while. We've been told that it's coming.
Right.
Yeah. But do you still expect it to be a big jolt to households and to pocketbooks when it actually happens next year and in 2024, especially given the current inflation situation where prices are high for fuel, for food, and for essentials?
Yeah, so you're right that the current environment is challenging in terms of prices inflation. So it's not so much the GST per se. In regard to the GST, I think the government has set aside the assurance package, as well as indicated that the permanent GST voucher will also be increased, so that the impact on low to middle income households will be largely minimized for the bulk of the population. So I would say that, but given this challenging environment, of course, we need to look at various forms of support for needy households and those who might be most affected by increases in electricity and fuel prices. And so I think the government would have to be quite responsive to these various needs in devising other offsets.
Yes, I think it's quite noteworthy that for each of the previous GST increases in 2003 and 2004, when it was raised from 3 to 5%, and then in 2007 when it was raised to 7%, for each of these times the offset package was about $4 billion, right? So this time when the assurance package was announced in 2020, it was $6 billion, and then of course this year it was further boosted to $6.6 billion. So the payout is actually quite significant for the next 5 years, right?
Yeah. So I would say that this is really part of the effort to give assurance to Singaporeans that this increase in GST, while being very necessary for fiscal resilience or sustainability, that impact would be managed and minimized for most.
Speaking of sustainability, my next question to you would be about the wider economy and businesses. Some of the bold plans announced this year will include for Singapore to significantly raise its climate ambitions. When we announced our climate targets in 2020, it was to halve peak 2030 emissions by around 2050. But this year's announcement at this budget was that by 2050, we are aiming for net zero emissions. So there's quite a significant jump in terms of goal setting. Of course, to achieve that, we are going to have to price in carbon, right? So the carbon tax is going up significantly from the $5 per ton now to about $25 around by 2025. and then as high as $80 per ton by the end of this decade. So my question then is that how are businesses going to be helped to go along to transform and become greener given this very aggressive timetable that's been set?
I think the government has sent a very clear signal that Singapore is fully committed to this green transition. It's in fact in our enlightened self-interest to be prepared for the future where sustainability will be key, competitive advantage as well. So that's the backdrop. And it's true that the carbon price schedule of increases may have surprised some by being more aggressive than some might have expected. But this is still well within the range already imposed by some of the OECD economies. And I think with the Enterprise Sustainability Plan, the government will definitely be channeling resources to help businesses make the green investments and the green transition. So I think every support will be given to them to increase the capabilities, improve the energy efficiency, and tap on alternative renewable energy sources as well to achieve this transition.
Then, while businesses are being asked to become greener, they are also asked to become leaner as well, right? Because in keeping with the recent trends towards ensuring that the foreign talent that we have in Singapore complements rather than replaces the Singapore workforce, at this budget, it was announced that salary thresholds for your employment pass and S-pass applicants is going up again. So this is the third increase in about 3 years. So how are firms being helped on that front?
So again, with this measure as well, it's clear that this budget is going to be a transformative one in more ways than one. And indeed, it requires businesses to adapt to the constraints and the future economy, both on the energy and sustainability front as well as the manpower front. I think firms are quite clear that we remain open to foreign manpower, except that we have some constraints. And so this foreign manpower must be complementary. And to help firms with this, then will be the efforts to invest in developing the local workforce. And of course, with Skills Future, with many other programs, there is a tremendous amount of resources put in place to equip the local workforce with the skills, and also to let firms tap on grants to improve productivity so that it can reduce the overall manpower take as well.
On this manpower push, this productivity push, of course, we've been on this journey for some time, as you wrote about in your book. So can you help us understand what's new this year, particularly for the different segments of firms? If we can start with, say, SMEs, there was a $600 million package that has been put together in this budget to help increase their productivity or to spur them to put in place productivity improvements. How does this add on to the different programs that have been announced in previous years, whether it was under IMDA or for SMEs to go digital? How does it push the ball forward?
So I think when we look at the budget measures, of course, they build on many years of effort. So this latest round again would provide further support and impetus to make the necessary productivity investments. And of course, it's not just about cutting costs, but also about how to equip them with new capabilities to seize opportunities. And that's also a very important part of the picture. I think in this budget, there was emphasis both on growing the global enterprises, that means the top in class, the most prominent firms that can leave an international mark, as well as to uplift the broad base of SMEs, which is also crucial if we're going to transform the economy. So areas like digitalization, which you mentioned, innovation and internationalization, these will be key for the continued success of the enterprises in Singapore.
That brings us now to workers. So viewers will be very interested to know what kind of support has been announced for workers. So I'm going to frame this. We know that NTUC has this program called the Company Training Committees, right? So this is a program where they work together with companies, the union and workers to figure out what kind of training programs companies need to put in place in order to transform, to reskill, to ensure that their workers keep on progressing in their careers, and then to, of course, then implement these training programs. What's new on this front this year? And I believe there's quite a major funding support increase. And what do you think of the targets that have been set in terms of the number of projects that are going to be implemented in the coming years under this CTC's program?
So I think the NTUC's initial efforts are bearing fruit, hence the desire to scale it. And really it's this partnership with the firms taking ownership as well, which is key, hence the company training partnership with the unions. Because a lot of the transformation efforts, if it's firm-led, it would be definitely relevant to the firms themselves. And this has the greatest potential to make sure that the workers are equipped with the skills needed to help the companies themselves transform. Of course, it will also be complemented by individual-led training as well. So we have a good complement between the employer-led training as well as self-initiated training, which many workers can take up through the Skills Future series and other courses.
I'm actually quite curious as to, so as you mentioned, companies themselves, firm-led training would be the best in that firms know what they will need, what their workers will need in order for the business to not just survive, but to thrive in the new economy. So where does the tripartite element or the unions element come in? Is it to put the spurs in the companies to ensure that they move at a quicker pace?
Yeah, I think traditionally the unions and the companies have a strong relationship in Singapore, together of course with government agencies, hence the tripartism. There are many important roles that unions can make in mobilizing the members and working closely with the management to make the time, the space, and to also make sure they can tap on the right government support and grants for this to happen. It needs all parties to come together in a sense.
So it's also partly to make the time for retraining, as well as to be able to tap on the funding support to put in place these programs in a structured manner.
Yeah, and of course NTUC's outreach among the workers as well as among the firms is very strong. Hence they're a great partner for the government agencies to also roll out programs.
So they're the ones cajoling them, whether it's the firms or the workers, to retrain faster, retrain more. And of course, through the COVID-19 pandemic, in the recent years, the labour market data from the Ministry of Manpower has showed us that workers, particularly in their 40s and their 50s, they are more prone to retrenchment, and when they do lose their jobs, it's quite hard. They take a while to find a new job after that. It can be 2+ months on average. Yeah. So how does this year's budget help mid-career workers to reskill and retrain? So we have we talked about CTCs where workers have jobs and they are spurred to go on training. But for those that lose their jobs, what are the programs that have been announced in this year's budget to help them to re-enter the workforce quickly, smoothly, and at a salary scale that is, say, commensurate with their experience?
So you're right. The data does show that those in the 40s and 50s are certainly more vulnerable to retrenchment, also find it harder to get back into employment after that. So I think this year one of the major programs announced was the Skills Future Career Transition Program, which is in a sense a continuation of the SG United skills program as well as the SG United mid-career pathways company training program. And making this permanent would mean that there will be part of the ecosystem would be supporting workers, especially in this age group, to retrain with industry relevant and industry-led kind of training. And this will be a good complement to existing efforts under Workforce Singapore, which have mostly place and train programs, which means people have to find a job first and then they're trained. So this complements that by offering what we call train in place, which means they can be trained in industry relevant skills and domains, and then with the employment facilitation be then helped to find a job. So that this is a good complement. It also enables these efforts to be scaled up to benefit a lot more workers.
So this, of course, requires a leap of faith on the company's part, in that the workers are first trained. It's a 6 to 12 months kind of an industry, very centric kind of program before they then find the employment with the workers, with the companies, right?
Yes, that's right. So in a sense, I wouldn't exactly call it a leap of faith, because these are areas that are identified as being very promising with a lot of emerging demand. And so there's a good chance that the workers, once they go through this training, especially since it's industry relevant, will then get placed.
So, of course, we're also talking about workers who've had decades of experience on the job. Even though it's from, say, a different sector, they are doing a big transition in terms of going to find a new job in a fresh sector. But they have a lot of skills and experience, even if it's... so it's mainly about enabling them to plug in to this to these new sectors,
Yeah, so there are two types. I think there will be some who are looking for an entire change of job or sector, but there are many others who just need to train in order to do the existing jobs in a transformed and new way. So there's this whole range or gamut of different purposes and training. And I think also the Skills Future credit that's given for mid-career support, the range of courses that are being offered will be greatly increased. I understand from around 300 today to about 7,000 courses. So this again will be part of the move to help mid-career, especially the mature workers, to reskill and retrain. I think it was also mentioned that the government is further studying how to enhance structural support for those in their 40s and 50s to undertake significant reskilling. So we look forward to hearing the further steps that may be taken.
Yeah, I think Finance Minister Lawrence Wong mentioned this year, he positioned this budget as the first in a series of steps that will be taken by the government in the coming years. Yeah, so you mentioned that helping mid-career workers to reskill, retrain, or transition to new careers is one aspect of this. What other areas do you think the government will be making significant moves on for the coming budgets? So not just this year's budget, but in the years to come, what can we look forward to?
Yeah, in terms of worker training?
In terms of worker training for firms as well, or even for on the sustainability front.
Yeah, I think that the directions are quite clear in terms of the priorities. It's really the specifics on how best to tailor the support that we will see some changes and maybe enhanced support in the years to come.
Yeah, and I think the government mentioned greater progressivity as well. So we can expect on the taxation front also, and also on the various policy fronts for the long run target to be greater progressivity in our system, greater inclusivity in our system. Yeah.
Yes, that's certainly a priority. In fact, I quite like the way the education minister put it in his US speech, the goal being to have confident Singaporeans, a competitive Singapore, and a cohesive society. Well, that may be the aim sort of through the education policy, I suppose, in the fiscal side as well, all work towards this aim. I think in Singapore, it will be more a process of evolution rather than revolution in terms of the fiscal stance and so on. So we've seen moves towards greater progressivity made over successive budgets, but not drastic moves, because I think the general principle that to keep taxes in the broad middle fairly low to encourage work and enterprise, that will remain. Of course, those who are better off will be expected to contribute more, but at the same time, Singapore is realistic about how much we can move in that direction, given that wealth and capital is mobile across borders, and we also want to be this, talent hub,
and also kind of a wealth planning hub.
Right. So these are various considerations, but overall, the intent is to strengthen support, especially for the less well-off, strengthen assurance, and make this a more cohesive society overall.
I like what you pointed to about Education Minister Chan Chun Sing's speech. I think that's a good time for us to talk about students, the next generation of Singaporeans, their aspirations, their goals, their desires. What do you think are the significant moves this year in terms of helping our younger Singaporeans to chart the new way forward together, as is the title of this year's budget?
Yeah. So again, I think that this year's budget will just add on to a whole suite of initiatives that are meant to really build confidence in the young people, helping them to take failures in the stride, be able to be resilient and nimble and adapt, to be innovative and creative, to be future ready, in a sense also Asia ready, and to have this international orientation. So many of the moves, I think, in this year's budget and COS also contribute to, again, freeing up the time and space for people to learn skills that will carry them through life. So linked to that, of course, is the removal of all mid-year examinations.
Yes, I think that's the main takeaway for many parents and students hearing this news that from next year onwards, for primary and secondary schools, there will no longer be mid-year exams lah.
Right.
But if we can unpack some of the other policy announcements this year from the Ministry of Education, I think viewers are very concerned, are very interested in this area. For instance, the announcement that by next year, about 2/3 of secondary schools will be on full subject-based banding. What's the significance of this shift? And by 2024, to have all secondary schools to have full subject-based banding?
I think this really is part of a move to make the education system also more customized. It recognizes that students do not have strengths that are uniform across all different subjects. So I guess it's more tailored towards their strengths and abilities. And I suppose also the removal of streaming removes a bit of that stigma that comes with being, locked into a particular pathway or labeled in a certain way. And that also makes for a more cohesive society. Given that we always say that people are our only resource, I think it's important to make sure that we maximize the potential of each person. So rather than lock people into sort of preset pathways, to encourage them to explore their talents and gifts and provide for that diversity of pathways and options for everyone to be able to express themselves, whether you are a slow starter, late bloomer, or you have different interests. How can that all be sort of, maximized? How can the potential be maximized?
Yeah, I like the way you framed it in terms of it's a confidence building measure as well. We've heard stories of students in secondary school. They say they like geography, but they're not sure whether they are capable of taking it at a express kind of level, right? So they may start out with G2 geography, and then the next year they find their results are good. They move up to G3, right? They build their confidence. At the same time, they are able to pursue the subjects that they think they are interested in and give it a try.
Right.
And then if they do well, they can step up in terms of the intensity that they take the subject at.
Yes.
And of course, for the common core subjects, you take it with across the board. There's no longer express, normal academic, normal technical.
You can take any course at the appropriate level for yourself. I think that's important.
Yeah, kind also, of jealous of the students in this generation. We didn't have that in our time.
Yeah, there's also going to be greater porosity across different pathways, whether from the universities, the Polytechnic, A-level stream, or IT. I understand that this year also the Polytechnic Foundation program is being expanded with more places for the normal academic students to apply directly to polytechnics.
So what this means is that more students from the normal acad stream can apply to do a foundation year at the Polytechnic.
Right, rather than go on to that, extra for the 5th year in secondary school and take the N levels and so on.
And the moves are quite full spectrum, right? Because for JCs as well, there's also some moves in that direction. Increase expansion of spaces for direct school admission, so not purely on your grades.
Yes, so DSA or direct school admission has been around for some time, but this is just a further step to expand the numbers that can be taken in to recognize broader definition of merit.
So we're talking about achievement in sports, in music, in various fields.
Right. And similar to that, in the past as well, the discretionary admission to the universities has also been broadened in a similar way.
Another point that was mentioned at this year's budget was this idea of increasing the cohort participation rate. Yeah,
the lifetime CPR.
That sounds like quite a mouthful and has nothing to do with actual CPR.
Yeah, so the cohort participation rate, in the past they've set a target of 40% with further 10% acquiring a degree in the mid-career stage, but I think increasingly it's recognized that there's no reason why degree education or education has to be completely front-loaded. That given the dynamics in the economy and changing requirements, people really need to continually refresh the skills. And this gives more options for people to pursue a degree as and when it is most suited for them. It doesn't have to be before they enter the workforce. So I think the lifetime CPR as a concept makes a lot of sense. But it's not just degrees, I think, that we need to be sort of fixated on. There's any qualification that would help workers that's aligned with their own professional goals and align with their future needs. So I think we should look at the whole spectrum of qualifications. Of course, degree is important because as, of course, the economy becomes more knowledge intensive, there will be greater demand for a certain depth of skills and knowledge in many jobs.
So there is a very strong signaling aspect to this because we don't have the full details yet. But in the years to come, what do you foresee happen in our institutes of higher learning? Would there be more modularization of courses, bite-sized courses at polytechnics, ITEs and universities to cater to adult learners perhaps?
Yes, so it's quite clear that there's going to be a transformation of our IHLs so that they become institutions that cater for lifelong learning and adult learning, along with, of course, the young people who are being trained. And that move has already been in the works for many years as they stepped up what we call andragogy or adult learning, bearing in mind that the needs and prior experience of adult learners may be different. They will also have some other constraints. So modularization will be one way, and also having the appropriate content in terms of being industry relevant, practitioner-led. Those are all kinds of areas where I think need to be strengthened as the institutions position themselves to support lifelong learning.
And I also think that this is another piece of the whole jigsaw puzzle on constant retraining, reskilling, and then together with Skills Future that was introduced earlier, the Skills Future credits that have been incrementally added into our account for us to retrain ourselves in the areas that we like, right?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of repositioning, or if you like, changing the mission of the IHLs, but at the same time, you're exactly right that it's about mindsets of both workers and employers. And we need the mindset of continual reskilling to be in place, and also from the employer's point of view to recognize skills-based criteria for even taking in workers and not just looking at qualifications. So all that needs to come together. And what the government's role is to build up the infrastructure, the programs, the funding, and the ecosystem to facilitate all this. But at the end of the day, it takes a mindset shift on the part of both workers and employers.
I'd like to take you now, before we close the conversation, to the low-wage workers, because this is one area where traditionally our understanding is that they are quite crimped, right? Because they are making ends meet on a month-to-month basis. So I don't think they really have the kind of bandwidth to think about skills retraining, to think about upgrading themselves in terms of the time they have in the day. So what are the moves in this budget to help the lower wage workers to to climb the salary ladder, to gain more skills, to become more employable, and of course to ensure that there is greater inclusiveness in our society?
Yeah, so as part of the progressive wage model, which has seen a significant expansion and will cover more than 8 in 10 of the lower wage workers. So in many of these domains, there will be skills and career progression pathways, giving a strong incentive for workers to actually train and acquire certain skills, because now it's more directly tied to progression. I think in the past, one, in a sense, criticism was that yeah, we can go through a lot of training, but what does that mean in terms of salary? Will my employer recognize it? So having these structured pathways is going to help a lot. And also with the workfare, there's also comes with training and subsidies that go beyond even what the sort of mainstream subsidy levels are. So that again would help. But I think it's also important, as we have discussed earlier, that employers also understand and make the space for this to happen. And in fact, with other moves on the foreign manpower front, I think all companies and employers will recognize that developing the Singaporean core is going to be key for the continued success.
Yeah, so part of this would be the $2 billion, this very big number, progressive wage credit scheme that has been rolled out this year. So one aspect, of course, is to extend the progressive wage to more sectors, to more jobs, right? Your food services, your landscaping, elevator workers.
Yeah, and also to certain occupations that cut across sectors, such as office admin support and drivers as well. So definitely this is a cost that will have to be borne by society at large. And I think through this particular credit scheme, the government is co-sharing that cost for a period of time with businesses, so that the impact on pass-on costs to consumers will not be as large. But I think society as a whole has to recognize that for future sustainability, for cohesive society, it's necessary to uplift the lower-income workers in Singapore.
So if I may ask you, what from this year's budget really stood out to you in terms of moving society forward together, moving us onto this new way forward, if you may? Among the spectrum of policies, whether it's manpower, education, sustainability, what really sticks in your mind from this year's budget?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned that I felt that this year's budget was transformative, and the things that really stood out are the moves on the fiscal front, as well as on the manpower front. These are quite significant moves to signal that we need to position ourselves for the future, especially on the part of firms, and certain adjustments will need to be made. And all that will contribute to a more sustainable and cohesive society.
Essentially ensuring that the whole society moves together, right? And then also that we keep up with the climate kind of change that's happening in the world, and ensuring that Singapore continues to be very competitive even as we enter a world where carbon is something that we want to do away with, right?
Yeah. So I think these moves are really necessary to position ourselves for future, bear in mind the global constraints, as well as in Singapore, the workforce constraints that we made. But it's not just defensive, it really positions us well to be competitive, as you say, which is going to be critical because we still need to earn a living in this rather volatile and dynamic world.
Yeah, I think as we go forward, especially for businesses who want to grow bigger, to go abroad, we are looking at going into markets where the carbon tax is in fact even higher than we are aiming for at the end of this decade, right? So if we are looking at exporting to Europe, say, right, or the Americas, what kind of things are we doing to ensure that we are able to compete in those markets, our workers, our firms especially?
Yeah, so that goes back to capabilities. Of course, capabilities in sustainability and green areas is one aspect that is being supported. But just generally, on the broad spectrum of capabilities, whether it is to do with the business know-how or executive training, or whether it's to do with technology and innovation. So these are all areas where considerable resources are being put in place, as I said, to really give a lift to the most competitive among the Singapore enterprises, but also the broad base, which would benefit from solutions that can be scaled quite easily, and advisory services where there's innovation advisors or chief technology officer as a service. These are things that are being offered and are quite accessible to the bulk of the enterprises. So I think we need this two-pronged approach, focus on the top, the most competitive firms, but lift the broad middle.
Yeah, I see that happening even for our students. So we have full subject-based banding, but for students who have the capability, who have the drive to take on, say, a third language, there were also moves this year to ensure that they are better able to do that.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
That's part of the whole customization. We don't want to hold back anyone who can go as far as he or she is able to, but at the same time provide the resources for diversity of different interests and talents.
Terence, thank you for joining us today. Yeah, it's really been my pleasure to have this conversation with you. Yeah.
Likewise, the pleasure is mine having this conversation as well. Thank you.
Thank you, viewers, for being with us today. I think it's quite clear that Budget 2022 positions Singapore strongly for the future, whether you're a business, a worker, or a student. So to our viewers, thank you for watching this episode. We hope you have found it informative and that this session has helped you to better understand what is in the budget beyond just the headline numbers. This session is part of the askST at NLB series brought to you by the Straits Times and the National Library Board. To watch past videos or listen to podcasts, check out the link below. Thank you for joining us. Stay safe and healthy.